Sabadi everybody, and welcome back to Winding Down Chronicles. So I recently came across an article listing things that the younger generation constantly stress over. Things that most of us raised in the 60s, 70s, and 80s probably don't care too much about. I'll admit it, I'm a proud Gen Xer. I think we survived, I biasly call the best generation alive. But I wanted to give my own raw, off-the-cuff take on it and summarize what the article says. This video is supposed to be humorous. They're my thoughts. So if you get butthurt over something I say, you are definitely under 30 or you're just a snowflake. So consider this a fair warning. You might get offended because some of these modern day complaints really get my goat. Listen at your own risk because I might get a little emotional here. I had to look up the what the generations were actually called and the years they covered because the only ones I'm familiar with are the baby boomers. They were post World War II. You know, our parents worked. Most of us had to come home to an empty house as latchkey kids. But we had to basically figure out how to take care of ourselves. We didn't have safety nets in any sense of the word. We didn't wear helmets. We didn't wear knee pads. We didn't have special protective gear for every kind of bruise possible. If we messed up at school, the teachers, the principals, even neighbors could discipline us with a stick, hands, or whatever they had handy. And guess what? Most of the time, my parents completely approved of the discipline. If a parent said I did something wrong, they immediately sided with the parent. I was disciplined not only by that person, but then again by my parents. You know, it was just that level of society of trust, similar ethics and mindset. I was disciplined by multiple people growing up. And the thing is, I actually listened to them. I didn't backtalk. I didn't plot revenge. I didn't go after them. I was shamed. I learned a lesson and I grew from it. I remember being racked up by a teacher in school for something he heard that I said, and he was right. I was ashamed in front of everybody, but they could do it back then. Now you can't. These younger stinkers, you know, we worked, whether we liked the job or not. We were expected to get out there, get a job, and pay the bills. We did it. When I look at these younger generations whining, complaining about the minutest things, I genuinely wonder where we went wrong. These are the kids of the Gen Xers. Why are they like this? You know, I just don't understand it. We're talking about my siblings' kids, especially those under 30. The ones that are around 35, 40, they're a little more level-headed, but, you know, is this the parents' fault? Or has the education system just raised a bunch of entitled, spoiled complainers? And when you spend 30 years abroad, working outside of the American culture, you know, you learn how to separate real threat from the noise. You know, but today the world is practically manufacturing these new worries. Let's take a look at the article, see my reality check on it. And let me know down in the comments if any of these stick out to you. Do you think I'm being too harsh on these kids or what? So let's see what these kids are stressing out over and how it looks when you're sitting on a porch of retirement. So first one up on the list, and no surprise to me, I knew this was going to be right there, climate change. To be fair, those of us raised a few decades ago, we absolutely care about the environment. We don't want the world to burn. The article points out a massive generational shift here. The millennials and the Gen Z carry a heavy, constant day-to-day mental anxiety about global shifts. Any weather change or severe weather change will drive them into a non-stop loop of online doom scrolling. I hear these kids are going into panic attacks over this. They're seeing shrinks for this stuff. It's literally insane, pun intended. I remember back in the 60s when the UN tried to start a scare and it died because no one bit. And then Al Gore tried to reinvigorate the threat in the early 2000s and he called it global warming. We used to joke about it. You know, now it's climate change. Well, guess what? The climate changes and has been one of the voices they're listening to is this Greta Thunberg, 10-year-old telling the whole UN, shame on you. I'm already getting riled up about it. So the only reason it sounds so much worse these days is because we hear about every little quake, every little disaster, every little temperature change all over the world. We know what's going on in seconds. You know, we're bombarded with it. News is exploiting this. You know, so as a Gen Xer, my brain filters out things I can't control in favor of what I can directly influence. I don't spend my mornings tracking global carbon metrics. I'm tracking the immediate logistics in front of me. You know, gas prices double in Laos and water is scarce. We just stop using it. You adjust to it. You just accept that that's the infrastructure reality, and that's what gets my attention. The only climate metric that I could actually do something about and want to see is if there's a typhoon coming, to prepare and to wear a pollution mask in Bangkok or not. So my advice is turn off the 24-hour news feeds. Focus on the immediate community, your own family, and your own local environment. Sweep the front door of your house. Maybe even think about sweeping your neighbor's door. You'll save a fortune on shrinks and depression medicine. And just stop using the disposable stuff. One thing that really gets me good is this Keurig coffee pods. I think they are an environmental disaster. Our generation actually learned how to conserve. When I see the younger generations blaming us and the boomers for the so-called climate disaster, I'm thinking, you sniveling little shits. Do you even know how we lived growing up? We didn't have disposable stuff. We wrapped our school textbooks in brown paper grocery bags at the beginning of every year just to make them last. We got our milk delivered in glass bottles when we washed and where they were washed and reused. Carpooled to school in used cars. We reused almost every resource we had until it absolutely couldn't be used any longer. My relatives' kids really annoy me with this one. My one sibling's daughters are constantly writing their parents about how they're destroying the planet no matter what kind of decision they make. Insisted that they start a bee farm. They get the entire house done in solar, you name it. She blasts them for no matter what. Meanwhile, this little shit is having her mom pay her brand new SUV loan payments and her college payments. She's 2 years out of school already and still doesn't even have a job. She's sitting there in her condo, not working, and blasting her mom and dad, telling them they're destroying the world. Entitled, spoiled little shit. Do you know anybody like that? The mom tried to reason with her, but do you have any idea how much this will cost us to do everything you want us to do? And there's still no proof it's any better. One final word on this is, I'm not saying we don't take care of the environment. I grew up with a high amount of respect and instruction from school and my parents to not litter and to respect the environment. I am an environmentalist. When I see people throwing trash in the streets, here and anywhere, or burning something toxic, or wasting food, it literally makes my blood boil. I really get pissed off. I absolutely hate people not caring about the environment. I saw the trash when I was scuba diving, and it really makes me angry. I'm a hardcore environmentalist, but I do not buy into this climate change hysteria. I believe it's a full-on money grab from big corporations. Do you know that even 10% of what we put into recycle bins isn't even actually recycled? Let's take a look at worry number 2. Following the trends. The younger folks are deeply worried about keeping up with arbitrary online friends. The right gear, the right brands, all secure a momentary sense of belonging in a digital world that isolates them. When you hear them talk, their goal is to be an influencer. I'm like, give me a break. What is that? Is that an occupation? Every generation has had its own version of keeping up with the Joneses. It's nothing new. The difference is how we handled it. I remember the things I saw my friends wearing that my parents couldn't afford it. Did I cry for the credit card? No, we didn't even have credit cards back then. I got the Nike knockoffs. I wanted the original parachute pants so bad, but I ended up with the Cheap Hills department store version that I felt like I was wearing literal plastic. Remember the Nerf football, the spongy football to play Fumble Rumble after school? Remember Fumble Rumble? My parents couldn't even afford the Nerf, so I got the Fluff. Right there in big bold letters on the side of it, Fluff. It felt the same, it looked the same, but it didn't have the Nerf logo on it. The first time I took it out to play, one of the stronger kids mocked me for my Fluff. And I came home crying about it. My mom's response was, tough shit. That's all we can afford. Just about everything I owned growing up was a hand-me-down from my cousins. Until I was about 18. Our parents bought what they could afford with cold hard cash. My parents used to buy me shoes that were 1 or 2 sizes too big and last 1 or 2 more seasons. I was the third kid to inherit the exact same VW Bug that my 2 oldest siblings used. Grateful for a Bug, even though it sucked in the extreme weathers, because it had no AC and it had no heat. The Gen Xers were a generation of resilience. Worry number 3 is finding side hustles. Younger generations are struggling with low entry level wages, sky high rent, and rising cost of living. Because they don't have the financial space to find their footing that older generations supposedly had, they're forced to constantly stress about finding side hustles and freelance gigs just to survive. Give me a freaking break. Wait, there were no 6-digit salaries right out of school. Unless you became from an Ivy League or you were one of the exceptional, brilliant people, you earned level entry wages. Rent was what it was. It's all relative. Cost of living was what it was. The idea that Gen X had space to find their footing, give me a freaking break. When Gen X entered the workforce in the late 80s and 90s, we were faced with recessions, corporate downsizing, and high unemployment rates, just like every other generation. Nobody handed us space. We had to grind too. The difference is we didn't have our phone or computer to be able to find work online. We had to physically do the labor. We didn't call them side hustles back then. We just called them having a second job or a third job, because you had to do what you had to do to pay the bills. We didn't have opportunities like they do now to scroll through an app and look for creative ways to freelance a gig. You delivered pizzas, you waited on tables in the evenings or the weekends. You worked at the local amusement park. You did manual labor after your 9 to 5. When I was 10, I was delivering newspapers. When I was 12, I was a cashier at the public pool refreshment stand. While I had to watch all my friends swimming around who didn't need to work, I worked at a local amusement park at various departments every summer during school. When I went to college, I worked summers, winters, and I worked college breaks doing backbreaking construction. When I was actually in school, I worked at a restaurant on the evenings and the weekends. When I went to summer school because I had to catch up with classes for college, I worked a night shift at a packaging plant. When I graduated school, I was grateful that my parents didn't push me out of the house, but my mom encouraged me not to buy anything new, and she said I could live at home rent-free so I could pay off my school loan ASAP. She was so anti-loan everything. My first year went to paying off my school loans, and I drove the same 20-year-old used vehicle to work. So I don't understand what they mean by we had space to find our footing. That makes no sense to me. We grinded. Hey, Gen Xers, do you think I'm being harsh there? So the fourth worry is cancel culture. Because of the internet's gotcha mentality, chronically online Gen Zers are constantly stressed out about doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing, being labeled problematic, or falling into the wrong side of the social media or the wrong side of the mob. This causes them to curate fake, idealized online opinions rather than sharing what they actually think. In contrast, Gen Xers and boomers don't give a rip. We come from a generation of speaking your mind and figuring it out. People say offensive things or mean things. You just get on with it. That's normal. That's life. I've got to say that this is one of the scariest trends I saw in the past 6 to 7 years. It was like a modern day online lynching for whoever the internet mob of losers decided who would be the next victim. Digging up old people's digital past from decades ago, and then wanted to completely destroy not only their present and their future, but anyone associated to them. People were getting destroyed for liking, even just commenting on the wrong opinion posted. It still looks like this exists a little bit, but not to the degree that seemed to be there just a few years ago. There was absolutely no grace or mercy given in this hive mind. I'm so glad I lived and grew up when opinions and things that I did when I was younger are not permanent and could be used against me. I did and said many stupid things, but to destroy someone's life for something that was taken most likely out of context was just pure evil. And the ones who were doing it were probably guilty of even worse crimes. Our friends were found organically, usually through hardship, so we grew deeper relationships than what you find nowadays. But honestly, I'm glad I'm out of the grind and I'm not pressured to be in an office anymore. In my last job, I started to see some of the small NGO head in that direction. Where you never know if someone will turn on you for the slightest wrong comment. Worry number 4, having a curated personal brand online highlights a massive generational shift for me. Younger generations are raised in an environment where their everyday lives are on display 24/7. Every meal, every outfit, every mood, has to fit an aesthetic or a personal brand. As Gen Xers, we just didn't care. We weren't raised under a digital microscope like they are now, under the microscope of millions of people. Gen Xers value whether something is actually useful or personally meaningful. This is a hard one for me to relate to. The first time I ever heard someone suggest it to me about having a brand for myself was when I hired someone to look over my CV a few years ago. I just wanted a simple edit, just to kind of update maybe the terminology to make it read better when I started looking for another job. That's all I wanted. But she talked to me, have you ever considered making your own brand? Am I that dated? The last time I looked for a job was only a few years ago. I never heard of branding before. Well, $600 later, she just reworked my CV into a new format and added some color to it. Before, my CV was just black and white, simple formatting, and straight to the point. That's what got me interviews for 30 years, and they got me jobs for 30 years. I fell into the trap, absolutely stupid thing that I ended up paying for. I lost $600. Now I have a CV that's on an app that I can barely use to update it. And I actually never really needed it again. So $600 down the drain for her consulting. So the sixth worry, setting boundaries. So the article notes that while older generations protect their mental health through traditional structures and action, younger generations are obsessed with framing everything as therapy speak. This author argues that Gen Z often take wellness trends too far, inventing arbitrary boundaries where they aren't even needed or weaponizing the vocabulary to control and police how everyone else behaves. So my take on it, these sniveling little shits wear their emotional baggage on their sleeves. Instead of trying to get better, they exploit their dysfunction. It's like they're trying to one-up each other on who's more mental. They brag about their mental issues online. They wear them like badges of honor. They need safe spaces. They're out there trying to arrest people for saying mean things. Grow the F up. We used to say, suck it up, buttercup, and life sucks, deal with it. Or sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt me. The fact that the younger generation posts and them going through every little emotion online, they have no boundaries. I just cannot understand why you would post yourself having a complete mental breakdown online. The strange thing is that people are following and watching them like this, like they're some kind of hero. I'm glad that mental issues and problems are more public about and being talked to. You have people turning this stuff into money-making gimmicks. They're exploiting themselves. They have no interest in getting better. They're saying everybody has to adapt to their mental problem. They're going to stay mature. They're going to stay unstable for the rest of their lives. And what kind of existence is that? What will happen to our future when half of kids become 40 and 50 and they're all mental? I think most Gen Xers are closed and less likely to open up about their feelings. We're much more resilient and likely to try to get better. I also believe it's easier for us to set boundaries with other people. The older I get, it is. It actually took a lot for me to even start this YouTube channel because I'm naturally a quiet, introverted guy. What you get from me here is completely unfiltered. So their seventh worry is finding meaning at work. So this article contrasts older generations who viewed a job strictly as a vehicle for stability, long-term security, and a steady paycheck, with the younger workers who expect their daily labor to provide a deep sense of personal purpose and alignment with the corporate mission. While older adults appreciate meaningful work, they view a job as one piece of a broader, well-rounded life, rather than demanding that a career act as a sole source of human fulfillment. I'd say this is generally true for Gen X. I'm sure most of us want to have a job that we can identify with and feel good about. Our options were definitely more than what the boomers had, but the bottom line of finding some cosmic fulfillment in a job just wasn't even heard of. We took a job and we kept it to pay the bills, even if we had to work multiple jobs. So from what I can see, these Gen Zers and the Generation Alpha, they're called, they expect to have some type of work that deeply aligns with their spirit right out of the gate. And if they don't get it, they just quit. They literally think that they're entitled to this. I've seen Gen Xers post their interviews online, and then once they get the job, they post themselves the day in the life of a tech employee videos online. They're basically doing squat. And then they film themselves getting laid off. Then they post the crying video online about it. And then they honestly expect the employer to want to hire them after seeing that. They have no shame. No one is going to want to hire you if you broadcast your drama with the corporation to the world. I don't know who these corporations are going to expect to have working for them if this is what they're going to have to select from. No wonder they're outsourcing it. It seems like these kids these days just automatically expect 6 figures, their absolute dream jobs straight out of college. Let me let you in on a life secret. Life doesn't care about your timeline or your plan. My entire 30-year career wasn't a grand plan. It just happened. Some of those jobs were great. Most of them were okay. And a few of them were crap. I didn't aggressively chase salary or status, although for me, I did want to be part of something big, and that's what took me into the humanitarian world abroad. You have to put in your time. You have to earn your scars. So on to number 8. Ethical consumption explains that older generations generally don't care about corporate ethics, political boycotts, or internet drama surrounding what a CEO says on social media when making day-to-day purchases. While older adults aren't blind to these issues, they simply don't let a corporation moral beliefs dictate their personal spending. In the contrast, Gen Z uses sustainability and corporate values as a major filter for where they spend their money and equally refuse to work for any organization that doesn't perfectly align with their personal ethics. My take on this is I don't think this is completely true of Gen X. I'd say we do believe that corporations should be ethical, but we also know that nothing's perfect. You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If I personally disagree with how a corporation's values don't align with mine, I'll just look for alternatives that better align with my conscience. I think there are a lot of options out there. In many cases, it's about picking the lesser of the two evils. This one is a benefit of actually living in a wealthy nation, and the Zoomers and the alphas, they don't appreciate it. You will not see this kind of boycotting in poorer nations, expecting a corporation and the wealthy to care about your individual morals. This is completely setting yourself up for a long, miserable existence if you do. So number 9 is, no generation is immune from a potential loan or a debt problem, but Gen Z seems to be much worse, according to this. They're starting their lives disadvantaged with high amounts of debt. Boo freaky who! To some extent, I will give the Gen Zers some credit here, but not much. What school costs today compared to what I paid in the 90s is huge. However, I do think there are some huge differences here. Some of the degrees that they are getting are completely useless. I won't name the ones that I think are completely useless. They're doing 4-year degrees, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on completely useless information, if you want to call it information, and other useless nonsense that they're trying to pass off as education. I went to school I could afford. I got a degree that was useful and contributed to society, and I could make money from it. I went to a state school that wasn't far from me. I believe that getting a degree was far more important than the actual school I went to. Compare that to my relatives' kids who are Zoomers. They have to go to an Ivy League school or some big name. They have to go out of state, even though the tuition is double. Why? I have no idea. Prestige, so not only do they have double cost of tuition for going out of state, also the cost of living, being away from home that far, the logistics to go back and forth. They went to schools, their parents and them had to fly. I went to a school that was a 45-minute drive away. Why? That was their choice. And then the kids had to have their only apartments because they couldn't live with other people. And they had a lifestyle of Starbucks and eating out and DoorDash because they don't know how to cook and they don't know how to take care of themselves. They probably even had cleaners coming in to clean their own apartments. I lived with 4 people, tiny room like this, another student, and there were multiple rooms like this in the building. But here's the thing, my one sibling mocked my other siblings' kids for not going to college, saying you had to go to college. It was the future. It was the only way to get a job and have a future. Well, guess what? The ones who went to school are decades in debt. Tens of thousands of dollars right out of school. That's what they're starting with. And a high, wealthy lifestyle. Eating at Starbucks when you're a student. And the ones who didn't go to school, they learned technical trades that will not be easily replaced by AI. And they are making excellent money with no debt. So my take on this is, It's a lifestyle problem that led to their current broke-ass state. This is their fault. They didn't live below their means. They let their kids live a luxurious lifestyle that just carried over, and then they didn't have to work. They were teenagers. So the kids are several years since graduation and heavy in debt. Why? Because they're living like they're financially wealthy and have a stable income. Their parents never taught them frugality and living within their means. They got used to a cushy, spoiled lifestyle. Now they don't know how to live on anything less. It's their own daggone fault. Those are the 9 worries of the Gen Zers and Generation Alpha. So basically, these kids are coming out of school today unable to read, unable to write, and unable to think for themselves, especially now because a lot of them are using AI to do all of the heavy thinking. I know I'm generalizing, but for the most part, if you're under 30, you pretty much have to prove yourself to me that you aren't an entitled shit before I take you seriously. I have a mountain of respect for the boomers. They lived through the aftermath of the Depression era, World War II, the Vietnam War, the Cold War. The younger generation wants to blame them for everything, but they should honestly be thanking us for all that we've done to build an infrastructure we're enjoying now. But honestly, I do think Gen X is the greatest generation alive. There are so many reasons I say why, but this video would end up being 3 hours long. And as for the Gen Y and the millennials, I can actually relate to them, especially those in their 40s and later 30s. Still saw some work integrity that I can relate to. I am so glad to be out of the office workforce, because near the end I had to work with a few Gen Zers. While they were nice kids, clearly see they had no backbone and no strong work ethic. They whined, and they will only do exactly what is written in the job description. They were the ones that called in sick when their nose or their ear hurt every other week. Our generation, we work. I distinctly remember catching malaria and being sick multiple times. I worked from home when I had to, if I couldn't go to the office, which was very rare. As most of the time I still went to work when I was sick. So at the end of the day, those of us who were raised by the internet had one major advantage. We were forced to look up and live the life right in front of us. We weren't babied, and we had to survive. We did a lot of stupid crap. I did a lot of stupid stuff, and I thank God none of it was recorded and posted online, because I would have been canceled multiple times years ago. So if you're out there grinding and trying to build a real-world retirement blueprint without the fake filters, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and if you're a fellow Gen Xer, give me a thumbs up anyway and drop an amen in the comments. If you're Gen Z or Alpha, boo freaking who. Nobody cares about your micro problems, especially me. Let me know down in the comments, what is the one thing the modern world desperately wants you to worry about? You simply do not care anymore. This is Winding Down Chronicles. I hope you enjoyed that. Keep an eye on the numbers, but remember to look up and live a life that you built for them. Take care, everybody, and see you in the next one.